Well, we've been in this series and we've been looking at Jesus as a teacher. And one of the things that we've noticed over and over again is how frustrating it is sometimes to look at Jesus' teaching because we want it to be rules and laws, and it's really hard to make rules and laws out of the things that Jesus teaches. And tonight, if you thought it was bad before, tonight's really going to frustrate the daylights out of you if you have any sort of legalistic streak anywhere still inside. Tonight's class will just rid you of that once and for all, hopefully. Because what we're finding out is that Jesus is not just interested in what you do. He's primarily interested in who you're becoming. And he didn't come so that we would be conformed to a new law. He didn't come to say, your problem is you have the wrong laws, you need new laws, here's new laws, now conform yourself to them. That's not what he said at all. He came so that we would be transformed into new kinds of people who are capable of living these new kinds of life. And tonight, we're going to look at what Jesus had to say about the topics of anger and retaliation. And I did not intend for it to sync up with the headlines as well as it has. But I don't know if any of you have been paying attention to what has gone on in Pennsylvania in the last few days with this terrible, terrible tragedy that occurred in this Amish school. Just a heartbreaking tragedy that brings back in graphic, bold relief the fallenness of our world. And we look at that and we wonder, how in the world can something like that happen? How can someone be that evil that they would pick on someone that helpless? And of course, the reality about that is that you will never understand the context of those kinds of things until you understand God's story. And you realize that we live on the wrong side of Genesis chapter 3, and that sin is an active presence in our world, and that we are fallen people, desperately in need of God's saving grace. And without God's saving grace, we are all capable of despicable, horrible, atrocious things. And that's clearly what happened in Pennsylvania. But in the wake of this tragedy, the most amazing thing has happened. Something that just baffles people on the news, people in the media. Nobody knows what to do with these Amish people who the very night this happens show up at his widow's house, show up at his father's house, hold this father for an hour, weeping with this father whose son has committed this terrible thing. And these Amish people say, we will forgive you. There is hope. There is forgiveness. There is love. They spend an hour praying with this family, and they reach out to say, is there anything you need that we can provide for you? You look at that and you think, how in the world can someone have that kind of forgiveness? And that's their first thought. We must go and visit the family of the man who did this terrible thing, because if we are suffering, surely they are suffering, and we will grieve with those who grieve together. And that's just, it's baffling. Larry King was going on and on about how he can't imagine that was even, that anyone would consider doing something like that. It really runs counter to conventional wisdom in our world. And the simple answer to how people can have that much forgiveness is this: they take Jesus seriously. The Amish community takes Jesus very, very seriously. So open up to Matthew chapter 5, and I want us to read some very troubling verses here. Matthew chapter 5, of course, this is the Sermon on the Mount. And beginning in verse 21, he's going to start this series that he runs throughout a lot of Jesus' teaching, where he sets up kind of, this is what conventional wisdom is in our world. You've heard it said, this is the case, but I tell you, this other thing is the case. And here he says it in Matthew 5:21. You have heard it that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Reka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there, remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you'll not get out until you've paid the last penny. Now, these are some troubling verses, because he says very clearly, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And yet, anger is just with us all the time. People carry around a base level of anger that can be somewhat frightening. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you, this is not original with me. This psychologists have been doing this. This is what's called a modified anger scale. I'm going to give you a few scenarios, and I want you to just sort of gauge in your own heart whether this sort of scenario would bring about a level of frustration or irritation or just make you downright angry. All right, so here we go. Here's the first one. You buy a new appliance. You go out to the store and you spend a lot of money. You've gone to Consumer Reports or whatever. You buy a new appliance. You bring it home. You get it out of the box. You plug it in and it doesn't work. Mildly angry, slightly irritated. Where are you? Just think on a scale 1 to 10, what does this do to you? All right, so you just think about that. All right, here's the second one. You have a problem in your house, and you call a plumber, and you've got guests coming over, and the plumber, you're stuck. The plumber comes in, makes the repairs, and then he overcharges you. And you know he's overcharging you, but now you're stuck. All right? For some of you, maybe it's a mechanic or some other kind of handyman, but you know they are overcharging you, but you're stuck. You can't do anything about it. Mildly angry, off the charts angry, ready to blow your top. Where are you in that scale of things? Okay, here's another one. You're carrying a very full cup of coffee at work, and somebody, probably some intern or something, comes around the corner and bumps into you, and you spill the coffee all over your new suit, and you've got a presentation to make in 15 minutes, all right? How many of you are starting to feel a little bit, it just rising up a little bit in you? All right, here's another one. Your car is stalled at a traffic signal, and somebody behind you thinks that by honking the horn, your car will repair itself. Anybody starting to feel it a little bit? All right, here's the last one. You're in a church service. It's supposed to end soon, but the preacher keeps going on and on. He's still on his first point. He doesn't seem to be interested in stopping on time, but he is really, really attractive. I did not make this list up. I'm just, no. All right, so we've looked at these 5 scenarios. How many of you would say 2 of these would get a rise out of you? Maybe 2 of these might. Okay, so that's most of us. All right. How many of you weren't here last week and you're lying about it? Is that, because that's what we talked about last week. Listen, we have a really hard time taking responsibility for our own anger. When we get angry, a lot of times, what are we tempted to say? Very frequently, we won't say, I chose to get angry. We'll say what? We'll say, you made me angry. We'll say that to our kids sometimes. You're making me angry. And let me just tell you, if a 3-year-old has that much power over your life, somebody needs a timeout. It's probably not them, okay? Control yourself, okay? But we will tell people, you're making me angry. And when our temper sort of flares up, what do we say? Even the words, we say, I lost my temper. Where do lost tempers go? They just, like I had it a minute ago, and when I wasn't looking, it ran away. But somehow or other, it always comes back, doesn't it? Tempers always have a way of coming back. I lost my temper indeed. Look at Matthew 5:22 here. He says, I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Reka, or that's kind of like a word that meant empty head or, twerp or something like that, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone, listen to this, anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, when I was growing up, I was told, you cannot call anybody a fool. If you called somebody a fool, you might as well just curse them out. I mean, you might as well use serious, hardcore profanity. Fool was not a word that we used. We could use other words that were equally ugly, but you cannot call somebody a fool because we thought Jesus was giving a new law here. Anybody else grow up in that kind of a house? Oh, so it wasn't just me. All right. But here's the problem with that. Put your finger here in Matthew 5 and flip over to Matthew 23. I want to show you something that proves Jesus was not giving a new law. Matthew 23, Jesus is in a conversation with the Pharisees here, and the Pharisees just would frustrate the daylights out of Jesus sometimes, and finally he's had it with them. And in Matthew 23, he's really letting them have it, and he says, woe to you, and he says it 7 times over and over again, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Look at verse 17, Matthew 23, 17, he says, you blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? Any word sort of jump out at you in that sentence? Fools, that's right. Jesus actually calls them fools. Now, in this series, we've been doing a series of pop quizzes. So we're going to do a pop quiz early this time. We'll do another one a little bit later, but we're going to do a pop quiz here, all right? So take out a pen, piece of paper. I want you to take this quiz with me. Pop quiz. Here's the question. Why does Jesus get to call them fools? All right? Why does Jesus call them fools? Here's our first choice. He forgot. Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, that was a long time ago, a couple of years ago. He just forgot what he said, and oops, I forgot. Is that what it is? Or number 2, Jesus is doing that old do as I say, not as I do thing like parents do sometimes. Is that what it is? Or number 3, it's probably some tricky language thing, some trick about the words in the Greek or the Aramaic or the Latin or something, and egg-headed John's about to explain it to us. Which of those 3 do you suppose it is? You guys are getting wise to my tricks, aren't you? The answer, of course, is none of the above. Jesus' teaching is about something much deeper than just a rule against using certain words. I think we got to remember how Jesus teaches. And I really believe that most people don't take Jesus seriously as a teacher because they don't understand what he's after. They don't understand how he's planning to go about doing it. They don't understand what he's up to. Because see, like we talked about before, if you're just looking for rules, what you'll end up doing is looking for loopholes. That's what people tend to do. So in my house growing up, I couldn't call my sister a fool, but I could call her an idiot. And somehow or other, that's okay. Because I didn't say fool, and Jesus didn't say, thou shalt not call him an idiot, So I could call her an ignoramus, I could call her whatever, but I could not call her a fool because I'm looking for loopholes. You see, that's the way legalists operate. Legalists always look for loopholes. They're always trying to skirt, well, technically I didn't violate, because Jesus didn't say you can't call them. He just said, and that Jesus is saying, just stop doing that. Just stop looking for loopholes like that. See, Jesus is teaching against a certain kind of backdrop. Everybody that Jesus was talking to had certain understandings, and it's against this backdrop that he teaches. The command was, do not murder. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that was beyond the pale, that was out of bounds. So what they're allowed to do then is divide the world up into 2 categories. Those who have murdered and those who have not. And as long as I'm in this camp over here and I've not committed murder, then I am more righteous than they are. And I can demonstrate my righteousness by how well I've kept the rules. And Jesus is saying it's about something way more deep than that. If murder avoidance is your holiness strategy, you're missing the point. Murder avoidance is not a recipe for righteousness or spiritual maturity any more than if I want to go to New York, I will just concentrate on not being in Atlanta. That's not going to work, is it? My whole strategy for getting to New York is to avoid Atlanta. That doesn't work. So he says, if your strategy is Christ-likeness, avoiding murder is not a good enough strategy for you. That's not going to get you where you want to go. But legalists are always looking to how can I use the law to demonstrate how holy I am. And Jesus says, I want you to look into your hearts. And I want you to see who you really are, deep down on the inside. And examine your heart and try to figure out, is there any anger in there? Any bitterness? Any desire to inflict pain on someone else? or do them harm. Because the problem is, you can avoid murder and fail to love. And as Jesus has demonstrated over and over again, failure to love violates the entirety of the law and the prophets. So it's no longer just enough to, well, I didn't kill him, as it, wow, you really did raise the bar high on that one, It's, are you loving that other person? And if you're hung up on laws, the real danger is that eventually you'll become blind to your true condition. So now Jesus is not, I want you to understand this. Jesus is not saying that you can never get angry. Okay, go back to Matthew 5 and you'll see this, okay? Matthew 5:22, he says, I tell you, anyone who's angry with a brother or sister. Anybody have a footnote there? Look in your Bible, you got a footnote there? Okay, a lot of people have footnotes. I have a footnote in my Bible, and the footnote says, some manuscripts say this: anyone who gets angry at a brother or sister without cause, right? And that is a scribal error, because that's not in any of the good manuscripts. Most scholars think that what happened there was that, people, back before there were printing presses and stuff like that, people used to copy this text by hand. And somebody was copying this and wrote that and thought, well, Jesus can't really mean that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. So he probably meant without just cause. So they kind of wrote that into the margin. And that's why it's not in most texts. Because it's so hard for us to imagine that Jesus would actually say something like that, especially if we're looking at his teaching as if it were another set of laws. But Jesus is saying, the whole point here is, listen, don't fool yourself into thinking that you're righteous just because you have managed to avoid killing someone thus far. That's not a real good gauge of spiritual maturity. Just because you've managed to avoid murder to this point. Look at verse 23. He says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your gift. And again, this is not Jesus giving a rule about church attendance or taking communion. I've heard that, by the way. I've heard preachers say that, what Jesus is really meaning here for us is that you shouldn't take communion if you know that somebody has something against you, you should go and be reconciled. And that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. Jesus is not saying this is the rule for church attendance or communion taking. Because if you had to have rid of all unresolved conflict in your life before you could come to church, I'd be in here by myself, okay? I wouldn't even be here. That's not true. That's not what he's talking about. Jesus is teaching, as Jesus so often teaches, about what life in God's kingdom is really like. And what he's saying is, listen, if you're a citizen of God's kingdom, then over time, gradually, more and more, you will become so filled with the love of God that you will be the kind of person that when reconciliation is within your grasp, you'll drop everything and pursue reconciliation, because you know that's what God's heart really is. God's heart is about building his community. And if I can play a part in preserving and maintaining the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace, then that's a no-brainer. Of course, I'll leave church, I'll leave the mission field, I'll leave whatever I have to in order to get that done, and I'll do it with joy, because my heart now begins to beat with God's heart. And what's important to God becomes important to me. And that's when I know I'm really on the path to spiritual maturity. When I find that God's priorities become my priorities, and I'm not just pretending like they are. And I won't do it to demonstrate how holy I am. It's not like, you guys have seen the show, My Name is Earl? Anybody seen that show? Yeah, you guys are too holy to watch TV. Okay. Anybody over here seen My Name is Earl? You guys have. Okay. All right, I like these people. Well, except you. You're still my favorite. But The whole premise of the show is this guy thinks that God is working on some sort of karma system, that the more good you do, good will come back to you. And if you do bad, then that bad's going to come to you. And he's had a lot of bad things happen to him. He's decided it's because he did so many bad things to other people. So he writes a list of everybody he ever did something wrong for. And now he's going to go through life and he's going to do something good for them in hopes that when he gets done finally, his account, his cosmic bank account will be balanced. And then what? That's my question. What do you do, Earl, when you're done, when you get all the way through the list and bad things still happen? You curse God? You're not keeping your end of the bargain here, God. That's what we do so often, isn't it? I did all the right stuff. I put the right change in the machine. Did God just eat my quarter? You see, it's not like that. It's not go and be reconciled so that then you can come back and think you're deserving of God's grace. It's once you become captured by the grace of God. What do I have to do? Of course I'll do it. I'll do it gladly. I'll do it with joy because God's love has done something fundamentally inside of me. It's changing the way I'm wired. It's changing the way my mind thinks and the way my heart beats. And now I have compassion for people I didn't think about before. And now I'm seeking reconciliation where I was fine with there being problems and discord and disharmony before. Jesus is saying it's about so much more than just some sort of checklist. And verse 25, he says, settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taken you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. And truly, I tell you, you won't get out of there until you've paid the last penny. Now, is Jesus offering us good legal advice here? Is that what he's doing? Listen, if somebody ever sues you, here's the way you handle it. You cozy up to them before you go to try to settle out of court. Otherwise, you'll have to pay way more. Is that what Jesus is doing? Of course not. Jesus is saying, he's kind of in a little bit of a parable here. He's saying, listen, you have a limited amount of time. Do this while you still have the chance, because one day there is coming a judgment, and you won't have the opportunity to reconcile then. While the window of opportunity is still open, pursue reconciliation. All right, be that kind of person who seeks reconciliation. Now, okay, it's time for our second pop quiz. Are you ready? Oh, everybody looks up because you're expecting the pop quiz. Okay, here we go. Second pop quiz. I want you to imagine this. Imagine your significant other, your wife, your husband, if you're not married, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, someone you're engaged to, someone you know. Imagine somehow or other you find out that they are cheating on you, dating somebody else, seeing somebody else. And it makes you angry, doesn't it? And rightfully so. Okay, what do? Option number one. Jesus said, if you're angry at him, it's the same as murder, so you just kill him. Might as well enjoy it, at least get the satisfaction of murdering them. Is that what you do? Since anger is as bad as murder, you might as well just go ahead and kill them. Is that what you do? Option number two. You call them something other than a fool. Something like, and I don't even know what that word is. I just like typing in cartoon profanity. But you can call them whatever you want, just can't call them a fool. Is that what you do? What about option three? You have to take them back no matter what. No matter whether they're abusive, no matter if they continue to cheat on you, is that what you have to do? Because there are others who have said, listen, since forgiveness is supposed to be unconditional, then you have to take them back no matter what. Is that what you're supposed to do? What's the answer? None of the above. That's right. Here's what you're supposed to do. You need to seek reconciliation, if it's possible, while maintaining appropriate and healthy boundaries with the other person. Sometimes reconciliation is not possible. But you don't want to go to your grave knowing there's something more you could have done. You want to be able to enter into eternity and stand before the presence of God knowing that as far as it was possible, I did everything in my power to reconcile with that other person while still maintaining healthy boundaries and a healthy sense of dignity and the image of God that is resident within me. You want to be able to do that. So whatever it takes to seek reconciliation with that other person while maintaining those boundaries, that's what you want to do. A good verse for us is Psalm 4, verse 4. Flip over to Psalm 4, verse 4, because this is going to be where our assignment is for this week. Psalm 4, verse 4 says this. It says, tremble, and the word there can also mean in your anger. Some translations say be in your disturbance or in your anger. Tremble and do not sin. When you're on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Okay, there's a lot in this short little verse here. First of all, the idea that it is possible to be angry and not sin. It's possible to be angry and not sin. And that's okay. That being angry is not a sin. It's what you do with your anger that frequently crosses that line. Okay? So you can be angry and not sin. What's the prescription there for avoiding sin in your anger? When you're on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. In other words, don't do the first thing that pops into your head, which frequently is to retaliate. They've inflicted pain on me. I want to inflict pain on them. Don't do that. Instead, think, ponder, reflect. Take a deep breath. Go away. Remove yourself from the immediate situation and ask God for guidance and wisdom. God, what do you want me to do here? God, here's how I'm feeling. Go ahead and tell him. He already knows. Use whatever words you need to, because he's okay with that. God, here's how I'm feeling, and I don't know what to do with this. I want to do this, but I'm wondering whether that's the loving thing to do or not. Go, think about it, ponder it, reflect, ask God. And here's what I want to do. Because this week, it's going to happen. I guarantee you. For some of you, it's going to happen on your way home. You're going to get behind the person who's driving 35 miles an hour and their left turn signal is still on from this morning. I'm just telling you, it's going to happen, okay? So here's what I want you to do when it happens. When your anger starts to well up inside of you, I'm going to give you 3 questions that I want you to ponder while you're on your bed searching your heart, okay? We're going to talk about and this is where the title of the message is, the how, the why, and the what, okay? First question is this. How do I usually handle anger? This you just need to reflect on your own wiring and your own personality, and because of the circumstances that have happened in your life, the things that have shaped you to this point, how do I typically handle anger? And there are 2 extremes. I have these on the handout for you. There are 2 extremes typically, and there's usually a scale in between. Over here on this side, there are people who are we could call spewers or venters. You remember the Honeymooners? You remember Ralph Cramden? What would he say? First thing that set him off. Pow! To the moon, Alice. That's right. One of these days, to the moon, Alice. You know, why I ought to. There are those kinds of people, and they love to spew. But here on the other end of the extreme, there are people we could call stuffers. And just given their personality, it's not that they get less angry, it's that when they get angry, they just stuff it down. Okay? And different people respond to anger differently. Ask yourself, on that scale, am I more towards this side with the spewers or more towards this side with the stuffers? And I'll tell you, pop psychology has not been good to us in this, because there was a big theory back in the 70s called the ventilationist method of anger management. Does anyone remember that? Like, it was all about you need to get in touch with your anger and just let it out. Let it all hang out. And even some therapists had these little things, they were called baticas. Does anybody remember those? They were like little foam bats, and you'd hit things and hit people with them and all these kinds of things. And but this is what the writer of Proverbs has to say about it. In Proverbs 29:11, Solomon says, "A fool gives full vent to his anger." I'll never forget, I was actually talking to a guy who was an elder in a church one time. And he was talking about how he's a let it all hang out kind of guy. And if you make him angry, he'll let you know. And he'll really let you know. And he doesn't hold anything back. And he was talking about it like this was some sort of virtue, like I was supposed to, be really enamored with him. And I looked right at him and I said, well, you shouldn't be an elder. You have no business leading God's people. And he got really offended. And he said, how dare you say that? And I said it because you're a fool. That's why I said it. He said, how dare you talk to me that way? And I took him right to this verse, and I said, you just told me that the way you handle anger is to just give full vent to it. And I'm telling you, and this doesn't come from me, this comes directly from God's word, you are a fool. You shouldn't be an elder in this church. Driving that church into the ground because he's intimidating and manipulating and bullying people into getting his own way. That's not the way an elder and God's people ought to act. And yet, well, I wish I could say it surprised me. I wish I could say, wow, I've never heard of anyone like that before. And yet in church after church after church, those are the people who get their way, aren't they? And that's not leadership in God's family. That's a fool. That is not, and elders are supposed to have wisdom. Supposed to be the opposite of that. A fool gives full vent to his anger. People say, I have to get in touch with my anger. It's not healthy. You ever hear somebody say that? Well, it's not healthy to keep it all bottled up inside, because eventually if I keep it all bottled up inside, then eventually I'll just blow my top. You know what? Have you ever noticed we never say that about other emotions? You just need to get in touch with your gratitude, because if you don't get in touch with your gratitude, one of these days it's going to explode and you're just going to be thanking people you've never even met before. You're going to be thanking random strangers on the street. We never say that, do we? You know what your problem is you just haven't gotten in touch with your joy, and you need to be really careful with that, because if you don't, one day this stream of hot lava joy is going to come out and spill all over your loved ones, and you don't want that to happen, do you? We never say that about any other emotion, only anger. Doesn't make sense, does it? You never hear a therapist say, oh, you just need to get in touch with your good feelings. No. The other thing that we found out is it actually feels good to vent. It actually does. I mean, it feels really good. It feels powerful to vent. But it doesn't get it out of your system. See, that was the theory, was that it's supposed to sort of let off steam or something like that, and it's supposed to purge the anger from your system, and it doesn't. You know what it does? It awakens more. Because I vent, and it makes me feel powerful, and the next time I get angry, what am I prone to do? I'm prone to vent again, because it makes me feel so good. It just feeds your aggression. So here's what I want to do. I want to do a little demonstration about how powerful it can make you feel. So everybody stand up. Come on. This is an all skate. Everybody stand up. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to really get in touch with something that made you angry. I want you to think back. For some of you, it was just 5 minutes ago. For some, it was something I said, you know. For some of you, it was earlier this morning, so last week, last year, whatever it is. I want you to remember something that made you angry. And here's what I'm going to do. I am going to shout yes. And when I shout yes, you're going to shout back no. And I want you to really be angry when you say no, okay? I'm giving you permission to really, I want you to really feel it, okay? Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. All right, sit down. There. No. Somebody's still going back there. It feels good, doesn't it? Oh, it feels great, but it doesn't get it out of your system. It awakens more, because that's why there are some people over here, I said sit down, and they yelled back no. Did you hear them? Because now I'm waiting for him to ask me another question. Because give me a pop quiz now, you know. I got your no waiting for you. I'm sitting right here on the surface of my, you know. It wakens something up in us, and it doesn't make it go away. It doesn't drain it off. It actually escalates. Did you notice that the more you said no, the louder you got? It escalates. It's not like it finally, I'm done with it. No. You know, you get louder the more you do it. The more it continues, the more it escalates. And one other problem that there's been a ton of research that's found, it actually feels good to be on the giving end of venting. It doesn't feel very good to be the one who is vented on. When somebody comes along and they just spew all over you, they feel great about it, and now you've got their junk all over you. And it doesn't feel very good. A writer by the name of Carol Tavris, who wrote this book called Anger, the Misunderstood Emotion, this is what she says. It's a great quote. She says, the contemporary ventilationist view is that it's always important to express anger so that it will not clog your arteries or your relationships. But if your expressed rage causes another person to shoot you, it doesn't matter that you die with very healthy arteries. And she has a PhD. And it took a PhD to learn what the writer of Proverbs said hundreds of years ago, that only a fool gives full vent to his anger. Now, this does not mean that we have to avoid unpleasant conversations or confrontations with people. This doesn't mean that we should appease difficult people and do whatever they say and cave into their every whim and their every desire. That's not what it's talking about. But it is saying only a fool gives full vent to his anger. Grow up. That's like what 6th graders do. It's a junior high tactic to try to bully. And could you imagine what it would be like if God did that with us? Like every time we got out of line, God puffed out his chest and bullied us? That's not how God deals with us. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who stuff. People who get angry, but they just stuff it down because they're afraid of being rejected, or they're afraid of coming across a certain way, or they don't want to be their mom, or whatever it is. And so they stuff it down. They stuff. And that's not healthy either. Because you know what? Somebody who blows up all over you, they may feel great afterwards, and they may have forgotten that they were ever angry at you. They're going around looking for somebody else to be angry at now, but they've forgotten all about whatever it was, the inciting incident. People who stuff it, well, they hold that grudge for a long time. And you may never know about it. They may be all sweetness and light, and they just can't wait until you drop dead of a heart attack. They stuff. And here's this goes all the way back to the book of Leviticus. In Leviticus, both of those ends of the spectrum are addressed. This is what the writer in Leviticus 19 says. Do not seek revenge, spewers, or bear a grudge, stuffers, against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. And there's a principle in that verse. That both ends of the spectrum, whether you are a spewer and seek revenge, or you are a stuffer and you hold a grudge, you know what? They both lead to the same end result, and that is an inability to love other people. An inability to love. Both ends. So the first question is how? How do I usually handle my anger? Where am I on this sliding scale from spewer to stuffer? The second question is a why question. Why am I angry? Why am I angry? Now, some of you're familiar with primary colors, right? You know there are only like 3 primary colors. I've got some teachers over there like, yeah, we know that. Okay, 3 primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Red, yellow, and blue. All the other colors in the spectrum come from some combination of those 3. Am I getting it right so far? Is that pretty much? Except white and black. White is not a color, and black is, or the other way around. Black is the absence of colors. Okay, so those 3 colors are the primary colors. Well, emotions are similar. There are primary emotions, and then there are some emotions that are really a combination of these others. Anger is not a primary emotion. Anger usually comes about as a combination of one or more of these 3, either hurt, fear, or frustration. Hurt, fear, or frustration. So you got to ask yourself, okay, why am I angry? Now let's do a little bit of I'll give you a couple of different scenarios and you tell me. All right, this one is aimed at wives particularly. Okay, wives, imagine that you're out running around and you've got plenty of things on your schedule for that day. You've got all kinds of things that you have to get done. At some point in the day, you realize that you don't have anything for dinner. So you have to go to the grocery store. Now, on top of everything else that you already have to do, you have to go to the grocery store. So you go to the grocery store and you decide while you're there, you know what? My husband is such a good guy, and I never tell him how grateful I am for the long, hard days at work that he puts in to provide for our family and the security that he provides for us, and I never tell him that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get his favorite food. I'm going to get whatever his favorite meal is, and I'm going to prepare it. So you go, and now all of a sudden you're spending a little more money than you thought you were going to spend, and it's taking a little bit longer than it was going to, because you were just going to run in and grab a rotisserie chicken and leave, but now you've actually got to make something, and so it's taking you a little more time. You look at your watch and you think, oh boy, I better hurry or I'm not going to get dinner on the table in time. And so now you're rushing. You get home, you pull in the driveway, you run inside, you start throwing things together, and the kitchen's a disaster. You get dinner on the table. Your husband comes home, and he says, "You parked in the middle of the driveway again." You get angry, don't you? Why are you angry? Really? Because you're hurt. Because he hurt your feelings. And that's really why you're angry. And if you stop and you ask yourself, why am I angry? Instead of just lashing out at him, I'm angry because he hurt my feelings. Now we can have a conversation. It may be a difficult conversation to have, but it will be a productive conversation. What you said hurt my feelings. And how can we avoid that happening in the future? That's a productive conversation. But it only comes after you've stopped to ask yourself the why question. All right, now here's one for husbands, okay? You've been at work, and you had to go into work early today, and the printer jammed, and it overflowed the print log, and you had to hit cancel, and your computer locked up, and you had to call IT. And the IT came, and he made fun of you because you don't know how to undo your computer stuff, okay? So the IT guy now has humiliated you, and you had a full cup of coffee, and you came around the corner, and an intern bumped into you and spilled coffee all over you. You're really, really angry. You had to work through lunch, so you didn't get any lunch, so your blood sugar is kind of woo, 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 and you have a headache because somebody brewed decaf coffee instead of caffeinated coffee, so you have a caffeine headache, and you have no protein in your system at all. You get in the car to come home, and you're stuck in traffic on 400, and it's just taking forever because they won't open. The lane is practically done. Can we just drive there? And they won't open it. So you're stuck in this traffic, and you're trying to get home. You finally get home, and your wife has parked in the middle of the driveway. You get angry, don't you? Why are you angry? Because you're frustrated. And if you will stop and ask yourself, why am I angry? I'm angry because I'm frustrated. Now we can have a productive conversation. Your wife says, you hurt my feelings. And you can say, I was frustrated, and I'm sorry I took it out on you. So there are all these other things that led up to this one little event. And it didn't have to do with the fact that she was parked in the middle of the driveway. That was just the capper, you see? All right, one more. Parents, your daughter knows curfew is 10 o'clock. And she comes home one night 3 hours late on the back of a motorcycle with a guy who has a shaved head and a bunch of tattoos, and there are empty beer cans as a trail, like a little blood trail back all the way down your block. And he's an ex-Marine, and she calls him Bullet Head. And you get angry. Why are you angry? Because you're afraid. It's 3 hours late. And I don't want my daughter exposed to whatever element he's involved in. Just, that frightens me a little bit. She's my daughter. I want to protect her. I want to know she's safe. I want to know where she is. I want to know who's influencing her. I'm afraid, and that prompts anger. But if you lash out at your daughter in anger, what you run the risk of doing is pushing her even further into that kind of lifestyle. If you stop yourself and say, I'm afraid, now you've made yourself vulnerable, and you open up the path to a healthy conversation, a constructive conversation. So it's so vitally important that we stop ourselves and ask, why am I angry? Until I know why, I can't really get down at the root, and I can't resolve it. I'll just lash out in anger. I'll never move to deeper resolution, okay? How do I usually handle anger? Why am I angry? What? Now the what question. What do I want to come out of this situation? Usually we don't think about it. Usually we just react. I have been hurt. I want to hurt other people. I want to inflict pain on them. But for those of us who follow Jesus, it is not to be that way. If you look at Matthew 5, later in the same chapter, Matthew 5, we'll start in verse 43 this time. Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even pagans do that? This is how our world typically works. From the sandbox to the boardroom. From the playground to political campaigns. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. Quid pro quo. That's the way we do things in our world. And Jesus says, I say to you, love your enemies. What would that even mean? Who would that involve? What would it look like to actively love your enemies? He says, this is how you'll show yourselves as children of your Father. I think what he's getting at there is when you do this, when you respond to hatred with love, instead of responding in kind, you're reflecting something of the character and nature of God. There will be a family resemblance, and people will begin to notice, hey, he looks a lot like his father. You've heard me talk about Dallas Willard, who's one of my favorite authors. He's got a new book out, and in his new book, he tells this great story. He says, some time ago, I came to realize that I did not love the people next door. They were, by any standards, dangerous and unpleasant people, ex-bikers who made their living selling drugs. They'd never tried to harm my family, but the constant traffic of people buying drugs, a number of whom sat in the yard while shooting up, began to wear down my patience. As I brooded over them one day, indulging my irritation. Do you ever find yourself doing that? You find yourself irritated and you just go with it? The Lord helped me see that I really had no love for them at all. That after suffering from them for several years, I would be secretly happy if they died so that we could be rid of them. I realized how little I truly cared for nearly all the people I dealt with through the day, even when on religious business. I had to admit that I had never earnestly sought to be possessed by God's kind of love, to become more like Jesus. And now it was time to seek. So I have a really, really difficult question to ask you. Have you ever decided to love your enemies? I mean, we've talked in this class about the power of making a decision. And for a lot of us, we have made the decision to follow Jesus. And what we really meant by that was we would follow him into eternity as long as he didn't take us up on the bargain until we died. We want to do our own thing between now and then. We'll trust him with what happens after. But have you ever decided, and we stood and we prayed and we sort of made a decision, drew a line in the sand and said, from this day forward, we're going to follow Jesus. Part of that means making the decision to love your enemies. Now again, this doesn't mean becoming a doormat, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is draw a line in the sand and say, no more. If you continue to do that, you must leave. Sometimes love causes pain, but it does so for the good of the other person. Not to pay them back, but to win them back. Just like God disciplines those whom he loves, not to pay us back, but to bring us back. So the question is, why are you doing it? Are you really doing it out of love? Are you really doing it because it's in their best interest? And now we wrestle with the question, why does Jesus want us to love our enemies? And the answer, plain and simple, is because it's what he did. Because Jesus himself took this very, very seriously and very, very personally. He took it so seriously that it killed him. And the Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 5 that God demonstrated his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. 2 verses later, he says, we were enemies of God when he sent his Son. And Jesus, stretches out his arms and allows himself to be ridiculed and tortured, made fun of, and killed. And while that is going on, he looks at the people who are doing it and he says, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. He loves his enemies until his last breath. And he is asking us to follow him all the way into that kind of life. The kind of life that responds to injury with prayer and kindness. And the kind of lives that seek reconciliation instead of retaliation. And so, when an enemy surfaces, and an enemy will surface at some point in time this week, when an enemy surfaces, you're going to say these 3 words that we've said every week for the last several weeks. You're going to look at that enemy, and you're going to look at that situation, and you're going to know what your options are, and you're going to say, here's my chance. Here's my chance to really live the kind of life that God created me to live. You're going to look at that situation. You're going to know all of your options. You know that you could spin this to your advantage. But instead of doing that, you're going to say, here's my chance. So sometime at work this week, you watch, there will be someone in your office who is a rival, someone who has tried to get ahead of you, someone who may have said bad things about you. Someone like that is going to come in your office, and they're going to need your help. And you know, there's going to be a part of you that says, now how the worm turns. And you're going to want to just crush them. But instead of doing that, you're going to say, thank you. Somebody with some energy back there. Thank you. At home, I'm telling you, guys, this is going to happen. Women, this is going to happen. At home, she's going to say something, and you know you could score a body blow, a technical knockout, by just one little sharp response. All you have to say is, you're just like your mother. And you know that would do it. That'd put her on a canvas for the rest of the night. That opportunity is going to come up. But instead of taking that opportunity, you're going to say, that's right, at home, maybe tomorrow morning sometime, or maybe this weekend, you'll be sitting having breakfast around the table, and you're going to be running late, and you're going to tell the kids, no spilling this morning, and the kids are going to spill their Cheerios or whatever, and you're going to be angry, you're going to be tempted to lash out at them in anger, but instead of lashing out at them in anger, you're going to say, now listen, this is the truth. In a room this size, there are some of you here tonight, and you need to do business. You need to do business with God tonight. And you know who you are. And some of you may even need to do business with somebody else in this room, or a family member, or someone, and on the video monitor of your brain, that face is popping up right now. Please, do it quickly. Do it soon. Do it while there is still time, because you don't want to enter into eternity knowing you could have done something to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. God is very jealous about His community that He purchased at such a great price. Do whatever you must to seek reconciliation. Don't let anything get in your way of living the kind of life that God created you to live. Let's stand for our closing prayer tonight. God, your love for us is amazing and overwhelming, and it was never shown more vividly than in this. While we were yet sinners, Christ Jesus died for us. And God, you do not just call us to follow you into eternity, you call us to follow you into that kind of lifestyle. The kind of lifestyle that seeks reconciliation over retaliation. The kind of lifestyle that refuses to give full vent to our anger, but instead chooses to love our neighbors as ourselves. Help us to be wise about this, to know how to draw boundaries without excluding people, to know when to have difficult conversations, but to always have them in love. so that we can marry last week with this week and be able to speak the truth, not out of anger and hostility, not out of a desire to get even with them or to inflict pain or do damage upon them, but that we will always speak the truth in love. And in so doing, we will grow up into the image of Jesus. That's our prayer tonight in His name. Amen. We'll see you next week.